Have you ever wondered what really happens inside a cell where no one sleeps? Where silence does not bring peace, but presence? This is a jailhouse confession unlike any other. A prisoner, isolated for 6 years, claims that the woman he killed never left him. That she's still there, standing still, staring at the opposite wall, without blinking, without disappearing. Just looking. The strangest thing? No other detainee shares a cell with him. No guards enter there after 2 in the morning. But everyone avoids going there, because always at 2:17 a.m., the same minute the victim stopped breathing, something happens. A shadow, a noise, a shiver. This is not just another mysterious case, it's a true story, marked by psychological manipulation, obsession, and an experiment gone too far. If you think you've seen everything in true crime, watch this video until the end, and you'll get goosebumps. Because what this man describes is not just a memory, it's a ritual, and what he sees every night could change everything you understand about guilt, sanity, and control. Now pay attention to her name, because he never forgot. And maybe you can't either. His name is Darren Whitmore, 39 years old, a former professor of forensic psychology. Grey suit, well-dressed shoes, voice that never wavers. When he was arrested, there was no anger in his eyes, only the calm of someone who knew exactly what was going to happen. To those who knew him from the University of Milwaukee, he was brilliant but uncomfortable. A man who asked questions like scalpels, incisive, cold, devoid of empathy. One student described it this way: "It was as if he were taking notes on our reactions for an experiment, not teaching." Darren was methodical. Every step of the day was a stopwatch. Coffee at 6:03 a.m., a 47-minute walk. Dinner at exactly 7:21 p.m. But what few knew was that he had no interest in normal behavior. He collected flaws, mental, emotional, perceptive. His fascination was watching when someone stopped trusting their own senses, and that was why he chose to work with patients at the Rensford Psychiatric Hospital. There he could see, hear, and touch the fragility. No one suspected anything. To this day, his colleagues avoid mentioning his name out loud, because what he did was not treating. He recorded the slow erosion of identity, and worst of all, with the pleasure of a scientist who never gets dirty. He just observed. Her name was Claire Donnelly, 28 years old. She had recently transferred to Rensford Psychiatric Hospital, where Darren was a clinical consultant. She was quiet, unobtrusive, and organized. Her charts were the most detailed on the ward. Every patient's sentence was written down, every reaction recorded. But there was something else. Claire reread her own notes every night before going to sleep. And she did it out loud, as if to keep something alive. Maybe herself. Darren realized this within the first week. He watched in silence from the cameras in Wing C where she spent her shifts. It wasn't desire, it wasn't anger, it was surgical curiosity. Claire had an obsession with control. She was methodical in the wrong way. There was fear in the details, as if she always needed to confirm that the world around her was still the same as the day before. She began receiving anonymous notes in her locker, short sentences, dated, numbered. Letter 3. What you see, does it also see you? Claire thought it was a joke, but she answered mentally. She began to look at the hospital mirrors more often, rereading words she had already read, doubting whether certain patients had really said what she had written. Darren chose Claire not because she was weak, but because she was on the verge of realizing it. And that made everything more delicate, more accurate, more inevitable. He watched her for 11 weeks, and he decided she would no longer be a patient. She would be the study, the breakthrough, the woman who would see everything, and who afterward would believe nothing. Darren rented a forgotten cabin in Mequon County, 45 miles north of Rensford. He used the name of a former patient who had been reported missing in 2009. Cash payment, no trace. For weeks he remodeled the basement himself, unassisted, unhurried. The environment was designed not for torture, but for observation. Everything about it served one purpose: to disrupt perception without causing visible pain. The walls were covered with acoustic blankets, then covered with smooth, unmarked white panels. On the ceiling, a single infrared camera. In the center of the basement, a chair adapted with an abdominal belt, cervical support, cardiac sensors, and a thermal control device, built from parts of misappropriated medical equipment. The floor was sealed with matte black canvas, cut to the millimeter at the edges so as not to create wrinkles. No shadows formed there by chance. On the wall opposite the chair, he installed a two-way mirror, with a dark background illuminated only when he wanted to be seen. Behind the mirror, a chair that was the twin of the first. But the person sitting there was not the patient. It was the observer, the judge, the creator of the distortion. A small built-in speaker played recorded phrases with slight distortions of tone, messages without context. Some were Claire's own speech taken from recorded sessions. Others sounded like familiar voices, familiar, all. Calculated to erode trust in reality. There were no windows, except for one, sealed with inner wood and a second layer of opaque glass. And behind it, a motion sensor. If Claire got closer, the recording changed. Darren didn't plan on attacking, he planned to mess it up. Show that the deepest fear does not come from pain, but of doubt. When you no longer know what a reflection is, and what you are. On the night of October 14th, Claire left the hospital at 9:04 p.m. He had his coat folded. Over his arm, cell phone in his hand, his usual steady steps. Her car was parked under the third parking camera, but the video from that camera, specifically this one, was corrupted. Cropped images, white noise. The other cameras, working perfectly. Darren already knew where she left the car. For weeks he analyzed his routine down to the last second, even distracting gestures like adjusting the rear-view mirror twice before starting the engine. That night, he was already there. In the back seat. He entered minutes earlier using a tampered key. Absolute silence, surgical mask, syringe, and a progressive action sedative, not to erase, but to confuse. Claire drove to the edge of town. The last recorded location was at the intersection of R46 and Greystone Dirt Road. A dead spot. It was there that Darren lightly touched her shoulder. Claire looked in the rearview mirror and froze. There was no screaming. He precisely injected it into the neck muscle. It didn't hurt, but confusion came quickly. Blurred vision, words that seemed to echo, a metallic taste in the throat. She tried to brake, but the car was already off the road. Darren took the wheel. He drove the car for another 8 kilometers to the chalet. She was still conscious when he carried her to the basement, but it didn't move. Recording starts at 10:07 p.m. In the image, Claire is sitting, eyes open, trying to understand where she is. On the opposite wall, a familiar voice whispers, "Letter 9. Do you remember what you felt, or what they said you felt?" She tried to respond, but the voice itself, came out with delay. That's where it all began. Not with violence, with doubt. Claire spent the first few hours trying to map the space with her eyes. The chair limited movement, but allowed the illusion of freedom. The environment had no smell, the temperature was constant, and the silence was calculated. The only variation came from the voices that appeared at irregular intervals, some with her own intonation, others with hidden noises, as if they had been recorded in dreams. Darren didn't show up for the first 24 hours. He just watched her in the mirror, noting her heartbeat, her pupils' dilation, her reactions to certain phrases. The goal wasn't to break her body, it was to corrupt her perception, to test the self's resistance to the invisible. And Claire resisted. She murmured names. She tried to remember routines. She wrote in the air with her fingers, as if scribbling her own sanity. On the second day, the recording changed. It was the voice of her father, who had been dead for 5 years. "Claire, honey, are you there?" She cried for the first time. But it was a silent cry, without shock, as someone who understands that something has already been lost. On the third day, Darren finally entered. He didn't speak. He sat behind the mirror, visible but still. Claire saw him and smiled, a smile that said, "Now it makes sense." But it didn't. She asked, "Is this an experiment?" He replied, "No, this is a return." He applied the second substance to the IV connected to her arm, a serum with hallucinogenic, slightly dissociative properties, but the effect was not pain, it was displacement. She began to hear footsteps that weren't there, and seeing shadows on the inside of the retina. Her pulse quickened, then he slowed down. The eyes remained fixed on the mirror, not on Darren, but in her reflection. She whispered, "You're not imitating me." At 2:17 a.m., the heart. Monitor registered the collapse. There was no shouting, no fighting, just a silence so dense that it seems to echo to this day. Darren didn't run away, didn't erase footprints, no traces burned. What he did was organize, as if the scene was not a crime, but a concept. Claire's body was kept intact, carefully positioned in the same chair where she spent her last days. Eyes half open, fixed on the mirror, as if still searching for the reflection that did not match. He cleaned everything with surgical precision. Every inch of the plastic floor was washed with an enzymatic solution, not a drop of blood, not a hair out of place. Her fingerprints were preserved, except on her hands. There, Darren applied a mild acid reagent, just enough to erase the prints without causing visible deformation. In the corner of the room, he left the camera on loop. He repeated the last minutes before the cardiac arrest. But with one detail, he edited the video, cut the exact moment of the final injection. What we see is Claire stopping moving, alone, as if I had given up. On her lap, a paper folded with precision, a single sentence. "You only see what you believe." On the wall, engraved with an ultraviolet marker, the writing was only detected days later by forensics. Letter 17, she's gone, but the reflection remains. The scene did not cause repulsion, it caused discomfort. It was clean, symmetrical, silent. The kind of silence that seems to contain sound. The most disturbing thing wasn't the body. It was the atmosphere, the lack of visible violence, the idea that she hadn't been killed, but convinced. Darren covered his tracks, yes, but he didn't hide what he did. He just rearranged it, because for him, chaos was not acceptable, and what he wanted to leave was doubt. Not if the death happened, but if she, in fact, was real. Claire was not buried. She was left, on display, as part of a tableau assembled with perverse precision. The basement transformed into a chamber of absolute silence remained locked for 9 days before anyone discovered it. During that time, her body lay untouched, artificially preserved by a composition of refrigerated air and stabilizing substances in the intravenous drip. Darren knew he would be found. It wasn't about hiding, it was about preparing for the moment of revelation. So he positioned the candle. A single white candle, unlit, was placed exactly 33 centimeters from Claire's left foot, and under the candle, a key. It wasn't symbolic, it was directional. The key opened a false compartment inside the psychiatric hospital's document cabinet, and there, hidden, was Claire's real file, not as an employee, but as a former patient. Diagnosed at 19 with trauma-induced dissociative disorder, family history legally erased. A past she herself began to doubt ever existed. On her chest, Darren taped a laminated piece of paper, 3 words typed in typewriter font. She believed too much. No subscription, no printing. Just a number, 217. He wanted them to find it, but at the right time. The cabin had a programmed odor release system. On the 9th day, the smell began to escape through the ventilation. A couple of hikers smelled the stench and called the police. When agents opened the basement door, they expected rot. They found silence. Nothing was out of place, not the time, because he made a point of stopping all the clocks in the house at the same second, 2:17, the time when, according to him, everything stopped being imagination, and he began to chase. The first clue did not come from the investigators. It came from the mistake of those who thought everything was under control. One of the experts, when reviewing the images from the scene, noticed something that had gone unnoticed by the initial team. The camera recording Claire was still working, even after the supposed death. The intact memory card was extracted and analyzed by FBI technicians. What they found there wasn't just video. It was a pattern. After the last heartbeat was recorded at 2:17 a.m., Claire's body remained motionless for more than 6 hours, but at a certain point, 5:42 a.m., there is a slight movement in the reflection. The body doesn't move, but the reflection, yes. Initially, they thought about digital compression failure, but experts confirmed there was no glitch. The mirror showed for a second Claire turning to the side, even without the real body moving. That's when one of the analysts, in a state of shock, paused the video. In the reflection in the background, a figure appeared, a static silhouette outside the mirror in the opposite chair, the chair that Darren used, but his body had already been arrested 2 days earlier. The cell was sealed, and the cabin was abandoned. So who or what was recorded there? The press never had access to this complete video, only leaked excerpts, sections where it is possible to hear breathing, but outside the recording, as if the microphone captured a sound that did not come from the environment, but from the camera itself. Detective Shepard, in charge of the case, received an envelope days later. Inside, just a pen drive with the name reflexo.mp4, no sender. When he played the video, he saw something that he still refuses to comment on in public. He only said one sentence, repeated 3 times during the internal testimony. She looked at me, and I looked back. It was on this night that guards began reporting whispers in cell 17B, the cell where Darren never slept again. Darren was interrogated again on the 12th day after his arrest, already in federal custody. The images from the chalet camera and the video reflexo.mp4 were on the table. He showed no surprise, no irritation. He just asked them to turn off the light in the room. I wanted to watch the videos in the dark. For the first few minutes of the show, he remained motionless, pupils dilated, breathing controlled. But when Claire's reflection moved, without his real body reacting, he tilted his head slightly and smiled. Not a full-blown smile, but an involuntary reflex, as if he saw something he had been waiting for. She saw, he said, finally. The agents tried to confront him with the evidence. They asked who else had been at the cabin. Darren just replied, "No one comes in, only those who haven't left." They tried to induce a clearer confession. They cited the reflection, the movement, the silhouette. He folded his hands on the table and spoke in a low voice. "Whatever you think death was, it was just the transition. The rest is perception." Since then, he has refused to sleep. According to prison records, Darren remains on vigil every night, always facing the cell mirror. At 2:17 a.m., he closes his eyes for exactly 47 seconds. Then he murmurs something inaudible. The guards report that from that time on, he starts to smile. Alone. No stimulation. Staring into the mirror, as if waiting for an answer. One of the cell's internal cameras captured a strange event. At 2:17 a.m., during a late-night technical inspection, the system recorded a reflection in the mirror, different from Darren's body. A second figure, no features, but stopped, looking straight into the camera. Experts said it could be a reflection of light, but the cell was completely dark. Since then, cell 17B has been isolated, and Darren silently continues, "Don't deny what you did," but waiting for someone to finally understand. The confession was never straightforward. Darren isn't the type to answer questions, he transforms them. During the third interview, Detective Shepard brought a photo of Claire into the room. He placed it on the table. He waited for a reaction. Darren stared at it for exactly 8 seconds, then said, "This isn't the first time she's died." The sentence dismantled the logic of the investigation, but he continued, quietly. It had fissures, little cracks, and one day, someone would break through. When pressed about what he wanted to say, he simply replied, "I just built the mirror." The FBI analyst in charge of the psychological investigation described the confession as a tale shrouded in obsessive symbolism, with layers of reality distorted by intent. Darren described the sequence of events as if they were part of a ritual theater. He did not describe death as the end, but like fusion. She needed a place where she could continue to exist, just not on this side. When an exhausted shepherd insisted, "Are you saying she's still alive?" Darren replied without hesitation. "I'm telling you she'll never leave the reflection again." That same day he asked to return to cell 17B. He said he needed to finish a conversation. The request was denied, but something began to change. He stopped eating. He started writing in circles on the walls with his nails, creating symmetrical patterns like distorted mandalas. During the security scan, agents discovered that all the patterns had a common central point: the word interface. One of the psychiatrists suggested that he was entering a self-suggested psychosis, but one detail changed everyone's perception. Darren had marked Claire's silhouette on the floor, with chalk taken from the pills she refused to take. Exactly the same dimensions as the body found in the cabin, and in the center of the silhouette was a pocket mirror, face up, without reflecting anyone. For months, the narrative had been woven around the idea of a single crime, a ritualistic killing carried out by a control-obsessed former professor. But as the records were reviewed, a pattern emerged. Darren had not chosen Claire by chance. She was the latest link in an invisible chain of patients and staff connected to Rensford Hospital who had disappeared, been forcibly committed or died under unclear circumstances over the past 13 years. Each of them had something in common: dissociative symptoms, memory lapses, and compulsive behavior toward reflections. Mirrors or recordings of themselves. Darren didn't kill them. He repositioned them. This is what he described in one of the excerpts from the last recorded interview. "The body is not a prison. Perception is. I just opened the door." In cell 17B, he wrote in dried blood on the wall, "Reflex 47 complete." When the agents deciphered this, they realized the number was not random. Claire was the 47th person involved, not in deaths, but in testing. Each experiment was designed to disrupt the sense of identity through fragmented sensory input. An experiment started years earlier by a secret group of dissident hospital psychiatrists, of which Darren was one of the last active members. The project was shelved, hidden in the basements of the judicial system after internal complaints were suppressed by false reports and changes to medical records. But Darren didn't stop. He refined the method, and Claire was the first patient he said had ever made it through completely. "She's on the other side," he said in his last session, "not in suffering, in presence." When asked if he had created this himself, he just smiled. "I was just the mirror." Nothing more was said. But ever since that night, the reflection in the mirror in cell 17B hasn't exactly reacted to Darren's movements. There is a delay, small but constant. She's still there, looking. The mirror in cell 17B was removed after an undocumented incident. 3 guards requested a transfer after reporting the same experience. As they passed through the corridor, they saw the reflection of a woman inside the cell. But the cell was empty. Darren had been transferred to a maximum security psychiatric holding center after trying to gouge out his own eyes with a plastic spoon, repeating, "They must not see again." Cell recordings showed a phenomenon with no technical explanation. On 5 consecutive nights, at 2:17 a.m., the mirror fogged up on its own. There was no steam, there was no breathing, there was no external source of heat, but the condensation appeared and disappeared. In the center of the fog, a small handprint, always at the same point, always facing inward. The cell was sealed permanently, and Darren never spoke again. He now lives in absolute silence, drawing circular patterns on papers that are never delivered. No trace of language, just shapes, spirals, circles within circles, always with a dark dot in the center. The last sentence he wrote before complete silence was recorded on a piece of paper hidden in the mattress. "She's not dead. She gives it back to me every night." Experts say this is a manifestation of guilt. Others claim it is a ritualistic delusion, but no one has been able to explain why, in Darren's latest scans, His pupils began to react with a delay to light, as if they were following a source the doctors couldn't see. And you? Do you still believe that the reflection is just an image? Because sometimes, what's on the other side doesn't just want to be seen. He wants to you stay. Comment there. The reflection never lies. If this story made you look in the mirror with different eyes, leave a like and subscribe, because in the next episode, you'll hear the tape found under Detective Shepard's bed. A recording that no one remembers making, but where Claire whispers something and calls someone's name, someone who is still alive.